You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half of the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
That's a perfect setup for today's conversation. If there's one question I get from reporters more than any other, what are the fuels numbers telling us, and what does it mean both at the convenience store and potentially across retail? We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Jeff Lenard with NACS.
Hey, my name is Donovan Woods with the Fuels Institute in NACS.
And Donovan, we're going to talk about what is going on today in the fuels market and what it means for retailers tomorrow. So joining us by phone today is Chris Rapinick. He is Director of Business Development at NACS. So welcome, Chris.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
So, Chris, one of the things we want to start off with is the whole concept. NACS has this database called CSX. Now, it has nothing to do with trains. It has everything to do with timely data. And you have more than 100 companies that are part of this, representing thousands of stores. And this is monthly data. This is timely data. And this is much different than some of the other data that we hear from about the industry, whether it's annual or on a semi-frequent basis. So can you tell us a little bit about CSX and what the numbers are telling you in the first half of 2019?
Oh, sure. I'd love to. So CSX stands for C-Store Exchange, and it is a database that was created for the purpose of helping retailers compare their business against other retailers. So the idea is they needed a common platform that they could compare, especially financial numbers. It was difficult in the past to be able to do this because of company size or different structures or whatever. So what CSX has provided retailers and NACS on the backside is the ability to compare geographically, by company change or whatever, the financial and operational results of each company's year or month or whatever. So CSX, for NACS's purposes, is the huge part of the SOI report, and it's the database that we use to generate all the reports that go into the SOI. There are a group of retailers that are a little more forward-thinking, that know that benchmarking is very important to the success of their business, and they supply that same level of SOI data to the CSX database on a monthly basis, which allows them to have a little bit more timely access to performance data throughout the year and not just that static view. Of course, the SOI report is the gold standard for benchmarking. It's just kind of the next level that's available to retailers that are interested in doing this more frequently throughout the year.
Hey, Chris, you've mentioned that SOI several times, and while I know what it is, can you break down what those acronyms are, and just for our audience who doesn't know what this may be? And it's such a valuable tool. I'd love for you to kind of just give a brief highlight.
Sure. So probably one of the most important aspects of what we do in NACS research is the SOI, or the state of the industry. And we call it the State of the Industry Enterprise because it's composed of several different things. We do a compensation report annually, which allows retailers to benchmark their human resource metrics. We also do what we call the State of the Industry Data Archive, which is a huge group of Excel spreadsheets and some other reports that are grouped together that go way back long before even probably Donovan was even born, but it gives a real historical look at the business. And then, the cornerstone of all this is the SOI report, which is two different aspects. We do the SOI Summit, which is an event that we do in Chicago every year, benchmarking for retailers and suppliers. And then the report comes out about mid-June of each year also. It's about 200 pages of charts, diagrams, and some dialogue from the NACS research department that kind of explains where the industry is going and how it performed the year before. So the State of the Industry Enterprise is the benchmarking avenue for convenience stakeholders.
And that's all annual. And we had just mentioned a few seconds ago, we're looking at some early release or what you're seeing in 2019. We have at least half a year in the books in terms of CSX data. And what are the numbers looking like? What are they telling you?
So just to kind of put it in context, the numbers for the first half of last year weren't very good. So, we were all kind of scratching our heads January through June of 2018. So coming into 2019, the bar was set a little bit lower than maybe it has been in the past. But with that being said, the numbers for the first half of 2019 look great. Inside sales are positive, about 5%. Merchandise is up about 5%. And food service is up a little over 4%. Now, the side that I think that we're a little more focused on today is the fuel piece. And, everyone knows as consumers that prices have been a little bit lower than they were last year at the same time. And what that's done is caused fuel sales to be a bit negative, just under 3% negative. But that's all driven by price. The good side of that piece is that gallons are up about 1%, and that's good news. So there are folks that are coming to our stores and still pumping. Now, with that being said, probably the biggest issue that we're dealing with in convenience right now is kind of the loss of transactions. And we've talked about this at the State of the Industry Summit probably for the past 3 years. If you're a retailer, I'm sure that you're experiencing some portion of this to some level also. So the downside of these good numbers is that transactions are down inside again so far for the first half of this year. It's not as bad as it has been. So we're actually kind of close to flat. The other side of that is that we've seen transactions at the pump, so fuel transactions have grown for that same past 3 years, and they've actually started a decline now. So this is pretty typical of what you might see in a time where prices have fallen and stayed pretty consistent, which is probably a pretty good description of the last 12 months or so. So, when people come up and they buy the same dollar figure of gas and it's cheaper, then they get more gallons, so they need to come less frequently. So that's definitely understood. It's our charge as people in the industry and ones that want to move the industry forward. We all want to send that fuel customer inside, and that's something that we're all struggling with right now. So that's kind of like the big deal here is that sales are up, and we're doing pretty well fuel-wise, but we're still not seeing a lot of those folks that should, or we would hope, would go inside. They are not going inside. So still somewhat more of the same. But as far as top-line numbers go, they look very, very good.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. And one of the things I want to kind of go back and drill down just a little bit, Chris, you mentioned fuel sales are down, but gallons are up, but then consumers are happy. So it seems like there's three different pieces going on. So someone's happy, someone's not as happy. As a fuel retailer, from their perspective, let me go back. As a consumer, I enjoy having gas that's less expensive, right? It's a little cheaper.
Sure.
And I know in years past, our research at the Fuels Institute, we've seen vehicle miles traveled kind of plateau and maybe even go down a little bit, but I'm seeing it kind of tick up just a little bit. So people are still driving. So I guess, is it a good perspective, would you say, as a retailer, that things are actually going to trend up or at least be consistent with fuel? Not so much prices, but just having that customer come to your store? There's a lot of things, Donovan, that are going on with, trips. Just a couple of the items are obviously, this term that's been known or come to be known as retail apocalypse, and a number of like big box guys that have closed. And this takes people off the street. If you're not going to, one of the stores that you typically went to on the weekend for a shopping trip, you have no reason to stop in one of our stores to pump gas or to go inside for a snack. And, that's definitely had an impact, and we know that for sure. And then, there's other guys from other channels that, maybe we didn't compete with as hard as we do now. Everyone wants a piece of this convenience business. And, we've always been kind of head-to-head with Dollar, head-to-head with Drug, head-to-head with QSR. Well, this is definitely having an impact on the business that we see in the stores. So although the fuel numbers do look good and miles traveled is staying pretty stable,
We think that's probably more along the lines of people driving more distances at a time for like vacation or whatever, because gas prices are actually pretty stable, versus the ones that we were able to grab, immediately and often, going from, one shopping trip to another, from the grocery store to club store or what have you. So yes, I do think that people are happy, and definitely customer sentiment is still pretty good. But the real reality of this is that people are just shopping less frequently because they're probably clicking and collecting a lot more frequently.
Yeah, and
and then go ahead.
I was gonna say I've seen it on the road. I was just on the road a couple days ago in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, and went to a local mall, and there was a lot of those stores were vacant, and you can see that in I've gone to my hometown, and you see one mall's closed. Tying to that, there was an article in the September NACS magazine looking at the NACS Coca-Cola Retailing Research Council, and one of the numbers that struck me relates to traffic, and it was that 80% of people who come to the convenience store are doing something already. Only 20% are going to the convenience store as a destination. Now, from public policy and talking about image and how do you talk to reporters or zoning, one of the things that I took away from that is when you talk about zoning hearings and things like that, one of the big things is we don't want more traffic. And that 80% number says that really convenience stores are supporting people that are already on the road. So that's where I'm taking the takeaway, but also where you're looking at it for the takeaway is if that 80% of people are on the road for some other reason, and that some other reason starts to dissolve, then we're going to face some challenges with growing that 20%, essentially making our stores more of a destination. And how do you make it more about experience? How do you make it more of maybe a place to go in and out in 3 minutes, but also maybe hang out for an hour, maybe EV charge and things like that. Long way of going about this, but one of the things, I don't even know if you track this, but do you look at, is it available to look at what is the average fill up, and is that growing, and is that one of the things that's contributing to a decrease in traffic? Because if we aren't really getting more fuel efficient cars, trucks, Ford F1 is number one for 40 straight years.
Always.
If those big vehicles are still on the road and people are just filling them up more and maybe more paying by plastic, does that gallonage go up and trips go down? Is that something that you're even able to see in the numbers?
Yeah, so we actually do track gallons per transaction, and we've watched this crazy ride that it's taken, because we've gone from recession type times where what you have in your pocket is the amount of gas that you put in your car.
Oh, and then behind seat cushions too. Don't forget that.
Right. A little change underneath. Yeah. So we started way back then, and then people were mainly using cash then because they didn't have access to credit, and then go back to this whole everyone's got a credit card now, so they're using that more frequently, and gallons per transaction go up then, and then it's also a factor of price too. So I'm the type, and I don't know if you guys are or not. Everyone laughs at me when I say this, but I put 20 in my car every time. It doesn't matter where I'm going or what I'm doing. Now I don't have a daily commute, but $20 is what I put in, and if I did it every day, I wouldn't care. So with that being said, obviously the fluctuation there is, if it's cheap, then I get more gallons. If it's more expensive, then I get fewer. So that's my thing, and I think there's still a lot of people that do that. A couple of other pieces of this whole thing that you mentioned too is card use for fuel. So far for the first half of this year, 84.2% or over 84% of fuel sales dollars have been paid for with the card, which is an unbelievable amount, and it's actually 2 percentage points higher than it was last year. So, I think, and you guys know this as well as I do, that most people don't carry a lot of cash anymore. So the likelihood of you filling up your car with, a roll of hundreds in your pocket is pretty slim as compared to what it may have been 10 years ago. And, when you're looking at, in some cases, if you have an F-150, it may cost you $60 to fill it up. So with that being said, and as an industry, of course, we've made it very easy to avoid going inside by, providing pay at the pump. So, a lot of folks are just swiping and going. But, another point that you made too, Jeff, about the F-150 is the difference in fuel efficiency in the past 10 years from 10 years ago's F-150 version. It's 9 less fill-ups annually to keep that F-150 on the road. That's a huge amount of gallons when you think it's probably, maybe a 30-gallon tank times 9 times the ridiculous amount of F-150s that there are on the road. That's a huge amount of gallons that are lost, by our industry for nothing that we really did wrong. It's just, how things are progressing.
That is a great point to bring out in terms of fuel efficiency. And what you're talking about isn't even going into the alternative fuels like electric vehicles. That's literally just with liquid fuel in the internal combustion engine just being more efficient. It allows us to, as you said, drive further with the same amount of gasoline, or energy. So let me try to paint a picture so that the listeners can kind of see where they fit in this. Jeff mentioned in terms of, trying to create a destination. You mentioned that many people want to go and they swipe their cards and they keep it moving. And then we also mentioned on the outside factors such as e-commerce, and things are changing the patterns of consumers. Based on the numbers and things we're seeing, what would you tell a retailer? How can they be successful and not, get caught up too high or too low in everything that's happening?
Oh, sure. So I've been with NACS for 10 years, and it's been our message to retailers of every size since I started working here. Basically, the message is that you cannot rely on fuel for profits for your company because, number one, they're uncertain, and number two, obviously, what we've talked about already, the world is moving away from gasoline. So what we have tried to do is we've tried to present the picture to retailers to tell them, this is an example, or this are the kinds of things that you should be doing. And what we've seen crazy investment in food service. We've seen a lot of investment in merchandising in the stores. We've seen, bigger stores, bigger boxes, nicer fixtures, more selection and more variety. So, a lot of people are making this move. And the result of what we've seen over the past few years are excellent fuel margins, historical level fuel margins. So we don't want to be in this situation where it's kind of like the boy cried wolf thing. So we still establish, and we still say this to every retailer that we know, and current events affect fuel supply, and things can happen to fuel supply in a day, and you can see a huge cut, and prices can change, and margins can go away. But what we know from moving forward, and NACS has a lot of resources at convenience.org that kind of talk to this, but we know, say for example, in Europe, that they're a lot farther ahead in the EV transition than we are. And we've seen kind of a good model. And what that is that you have to take your store, take those fuel margins that you're earning now and reinvest them into your property. Do the free Wi-Fi thing, of course. Do seating, of course, but take it to the next level. Because what you have to do, your level of competition in maybe the next 10 years is going to be how do you compete for the 30 or 45 minutes that someone has that they're going to stop to charge their vehicle. You have to be the guy that they're going to say, hey, this is where I want to spend my X amount of minutes. And that could be anything. In some cases, you may have to think out of the box. It's certainly a good food offer. It's certainly a good variety of merchandise, but maybe it's something like a nail salon or a gym or what have you. Whatever you can do to make people feel safe, comfortable, and have value in the time that they spend in your store is really what you should do. And it's probably not sitting around waiting for fuel margins to come in.
So thinking about the phrase, every picture tells a story, want to look at, does every metric tell a story? And do you have any stories related to metrics? And what I'm thinking of is, we know 10 years ago we had the recession, and that changed everything. And that changed how people bought. And obviously in our industry, there was a downturn. There was a loss of stores. Where now at 5 years, where the nationwide average for gas has been below $3. And that's certainly something else that has changed behaviors. It's been good for the industry. It's been very good for the industry for both fuels and for inside the store. But are there any metrics, whether this year or fairly recently, that just tell a very interesting story to you that you think that might be worth sharing in terms of how do you look at the monthly numbers and what is the big aha related to them?
Sure. So the first thing that I do when I go to pull reports, I always look at the top line numbers, and my focus is really operationally. For me personally, I look more at the inside business. So I look at food service, merchandise, and then I drop normally down to the expense line, because this is one of the other big themes that NACS has been addressing for the past couple of years. Obviously, profitability of the industry is as important as the sales that we're generating. And what we've seen, everyone is probably pretty aware that there's a pretty large labor crisis in the United States, especially for folks that are kind of considered entry-level positions like convenience has historically been. So my next stop is always to expenses, and I think that's probably one of the best things to look at to kind of say, okay, how are retailers feeling? Are expenses going much higher? Are they growing at a rate that's faster than our sales are? And that's what it's been the past few years. We do a comparison of direct store operating expenses versus inside sales or inside gross profit dollar growth. And what our hope is that inside gross profit dollar growth that we really have control against is growing faster than the rate of that direct store operating expenses. And that has not been the case for the past few years. We look at that monthly, and it definitely tells the story. And another big piece of that direct store operating expense is card fees too. So we watch card fees very closely as a piece of that. It's not as controllable, but definitely something that we have to be very aware of. And really, in terms of benchmarking or using CSX or using the State of the Industry report or what have you, that expense line is really where you can have an immediate impact. So you may not be able to control your card fees, but you probably can control how much you're spending on supplies or how much you spend on wages and benefits. Unfortunately, you don't want to lose people, but that's a reality for your business. Sometimes you have to let someone go. So with that being said, that whole group of expenses, especially the direct ones, are items that you can go in and you can save yourself some money and improve your performance pretty immediately if you actually follow it pretty closely. So that's my spot. Direct store operating expenses is a huge spot.
Yeah, related to just, you mentioned card fees, and just going back to that, we survey consumers every year, and we ask, last time you went to the gas station, did you pay by cash, credit, or debit? And the latest numbers, I believe, are right around 75%. That's from January of this year. And seeing that, and they've crept up percentage point or so every year over the last decade. And hearing that we're in the 80s now, that's staggering. And that doesn't necessarily mean that if somebody's filling up more gallons, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for the industry. It's great that people are getting fuel, but if more gallons means fewer trips inside the store, there's the trade-off there. So, and of course, there's more direct store operating expenses related to credit. So there are a lot of dynamics at play when you look at the numbers and you look at, okay, this is positive, this is worrisome, etc. Any things right now that are not yet at that level of a trend, but something that you see in the numbers from this year that are saying, that's interesting. If this continues, we ought to do something about it? Not really. It's kind of more of the same on the expense side. Wages and benefits, just in the short term, near future, next couple of years, a lot of this $15 minimum wage is going to hit. And, when you kind of think about the thought process is minimum wage is like, I guess, $7.50 or $7.25 right now. But as these states adopt this, essentially you're going to pay every employee that you have at minimum twice as much as that they make now. So if you are not
looking for ways to generate new revenue, or at least making sure that you have the absolute best of the best employees right now today as a retailer, then in a year or 2 years, then you're likely going to be paying a terrible employee $15 an hour, just like you're paying a good employee $15 an hour. So that would be my, another watch out on the expense side is that if you don't pull your employees close to you now, when they cost you twice as much, it's going to hurt a lot more. And you're going to look around and probably not be able to afford anyone, to be quite honest with you. Some of the smaller stores that, maybe don't have fuel sales to help, bolster their profits, and they're just, running a relatively small operation, it's going to be difficult for these guys to be able to assume the doubling of the salaries that they're paying employees in the store.
Chris, and Jeff, it kills me still to drive around the Northern Virginia area where we're at and not see any Radio Shacks or very few Best Buys or stores that I used to, or no Circuit Cities at all. Just things that I used to really care about, and they're just gone. They were institutions of my childhood, and they're gone. That can happen to anyone, to any company. So, Chris, if I'm a retailer, I know what SOI is, I know what CSX is. How would you get involved to keep up with this? Are there ways to, purchase or download the SOI just to get a taste of it? Or how would you invite someone to kind of be more aware of what's happening industry-wide?
Oh, sure. So you can go out on convenience.org, and obviously there's tons of resources out there all the time. The NACS Daily is a great resource that if you're not subscribed to now, then you definitely should do that. Lots of great articles, and usually a link there to provide you with more information. If you're interested in learning more about the SOI Enterprise, or participating by providing data, then you can definitely contact me. You can find my information out on the research page at convenience.org. We also provide kind of a free sample of the SOI report in the form of an executive summary, which you should be able to find out on convenience.org in the products and services area. And if you're not able to find that, or you want to talk about it, then you're more than welcome to give me a call or an email, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it. One thing that makes the SOI what it is now is the participation of retailers. And the more, better, faster we get data, and more, better, faster that we can provide it back to you in the form of the SOI report, the more valuable it is to everyone. So we welcome any participation of anyone that's interested.
Couldn't have said it better ourselves, and that's a perfect way to wrap this up, Chris. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.